So I just want to welcome everyone. This is Inefficiency is Messy and Bourbon is Neat. And just go through a quick couple housekeeping notes. So this meeting is being recorded, as you heard. We are going to ask you to use the chat function for any questions during the demo. And we'll go ahead and open it up for Q&A after the presentation for just a few minutes. And then we'll jump into what you're all waiting for, which is the bourbon tasting with Patrick. Once we get to the bourbon tasting, we will encourage everyone to be on camera. You can share your comments out loud and ask any questions you have through the chat again. So with that, I'm just going to introduce Tanner Trombley. He's a product manager with Nuance, and he'll be doing our PowerScribe 1 demo. And Patrick Garrett is joining us from Bourbon and Banter for the whiskey tasting. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
All right. So thank you very much. I think I'll start things off here. So thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to take the next 20 or 25 minutes to talk to you about some of the exciting changes and features that we're introducing into PowerScribe 1. I'll have a couple demos that I'll weave into a little bit of a presentation here as well. And then most importantly, once I'm done, we get to go on to the bourbon part, which I'm excited to participate in as well. And as Andrea said, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A section. I think it just helps keep things on time. We have a lot of material to cover in a short period of time, and we really do want to get you onto that the bourbon tasting piece at the end. But we want to make sure that we're answering all the questions that you have. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here real quick. So again, we're going to start right now with a little bit of an overview of PowerScribe 1 and some of our core focuses that we had, some of the features that we really wanted to deliver on when we built the PowerScribe 1 solution for you. I'm going to spend probably about 15 minutes talking about some of those core PowerScribe 1 features, and then we'll spend the last 10 minutes talking about a new integration feature that we have called PowerCast. So the first thing that I want to talk about here is PowerScribe 1 is really designed for the user. We spent a lot of time doing extensive research with radiologists, admins, the people who use the application day in and day out to understand what was important to them, the challenges that they faced within their day-to-day workflow, the challenges they faced with PowerScribe 360. And what we really wanted to do is provide a solution that kind of addressed those day-to-day challenges, things like radiologist fatigue from the amount of complex data that's being put in front of them. Try to reduce the amount of interruptions during the reading workflow, so we're not popping up a bunch of message boxes, and really try to provide a more efficient system for you, while at the same time providing you a more modern user interface, a more usable user experience, something that might be a little bit more intuitive. So what you can see here on this slide is an example of our current version, PowerScribe 360, that a lot of our sites, a lot of you are using today. In a comparison with what PowerScribe 1 looks like. And as you can see, the first change is that we've moved from this kind of Microsoft-based design. We'd originally done that to kind of give a user experience that was familiar. Everybody was out there using Microsoft Word or Outlook, and we originally designed the application around those features. But we wanted to, again, move it to a more modern design and really address features that help you within your radiology reading environment. And the first piece that you'll notice here is that we finally have a dark mode available for the radiologist. It's not going to be that bright, glaring white screen contrasting, your dark mode work list packs and other features. So that's the first thing that you're going to notice here with PowerScribe. And then also really a simplification of the data that's put in front of you. There's not a whole bunch of buttons. There's not a whole bunch of complex information. You have access to all the same data, but it's just presented in a more intelligent manner. So you can see here's an example of decision support between the two applications. We moved it from kind of a separate module that it lived at the bottom of the diagnostic report within PowerScribe 360. And then here in PowerScribe 1, we allow you to view it kind of inline. And I'll have an example for this when I go into the demo, but it really allows you to get decision support presented to you real time based on the clinical language understanding that's always running against the PowerScribe 1 interpretation that's happening. We've also tried to spend a lot of time focusing on reducing reporting errors. And so we've extended features that we've had historically, like our quality check, into PowerScribe 1. But again, rather than putting a message box up to it, we present it to you over in what we call our Smart Assist page. Again, I'll highlight this in the demonstration. But it's in a way that's there for you to address when you're ready to address it, but it doesn't have to be done immediately. And again, we're just trying to support you with information presented to you real time, but allow you to address it when it's convenient for you. So you're not having to have constant interruptions between looking at your PACS images, addressing issues within your report, going back to PACS, et cetera. We're trying to keep your eyes focused on the PACS, on the images, on the most important pieces for you, and let the PowerScribe experience kind of support that reading workflow. And then I'll also highlight this in the demonstration a little bit, but we've spent a little bit of time focused on how we present our prior reports. And again, you'll see over here on the right-hand side of the screen, it's presented in a more useful manner with relevant priors displayed at the top, additional priors displayed at the bottom. And then we'll also provide a demonstration of what we're calling our ambient mode. This is a feature that really allows you to generate a structured report, but dictate it in a non-structured manner. The way that the system works is you just simply dictate your findings as they occur. And when you apply those findings, our NLP goes through and takes a look at the dictated text and applies it to the right fields in the report. Again, allowing you to create a structured report, but dictated in a very non-structured manner. And so with that, I'm going to hop into the application and give you a quick demonstration of what PowerScribe 1 looks like. All right, so here you see the new launch page for PowerScribe 1, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up an exam. And again, you'll notice that we're in a dark mode presentation state. Again, much easier on the eyes. As we normally do, PowerScribe automatically loads the appropriate template for you to be able to see. And I just want to highlight a couple of things here real quick, just as the report opens up. So we are integrated to our AI marketplace. And in this situation, AI has been done on the exams ahead of the radiologist picking up to do their interpretation. And you can see that we've automatically inserted some findings already into the report. You can tell that they were inserted automatically because they have this purple text associated with them. So that's where you know it came in from AI from an outside system. Now, you as the consumers have all the control over how AI results and external results are put into your report. In this case, it's an example of we had a rule set up to automatically put the information in. But you can also be alerted that there's additional AI findings and choose to have those findings inserted in a more manual fashion. So what I'm going to do is I see here I have additional AI findings for pulmonary nodules. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the AI findings button, and it's going to launch our findings navigator. And it's going to launch our partner viewer, eUnity. And so right here, you can see as the eUnity viewer loads up, it's already brought me to the relevant image. You can see that there's a pulmonary nodule kind of already circled here. But in this case, it's a bit of a smaller nodule. So I'm going to go ahead and decline that result. And it's going to bring me to the next finding. This one's much larger and maybe a little bit more significant. So I want to accept the findings that came in from the AI vendor. And you can see here a summary of our findings and the generated text that happened. Again, in this case, our clinical language understanding has recognized that this is a pulmonary nodule. And through our clinical guidance system, we know that we need to apply the Fleischner criteria, and we can use Fleischner to automatically generate your findings and impressions text. So in this case, without having to dictate anything, I simply click on the OK button. And that data is, again, automatically populated into the report, into the appropriate fields. You can see the impressions text is listed here. Again, more findings text is listed here in purple. But the other thing that you'll notice over here in the Smart Assist tab is that there's some system suggestions for follow-up. So again, our NLP is constantly running against the report. In this case, it recognizes that there's a follow-up recommended within the dictated text. And so I can click on that. And I apologize for the slowness of the system. It typically happens when I'm presenting on video. So you can see right here where the findings were identified. I can pull up my findings recommendation. Let me minimize this window here for you so you can see a little bit more. And I can look at the specific recommendations. I can update information like laterality. I can change the time between, but let's just say I want to accept both of these recommendations and click on OK. What this now does is it sends an outbound message to Epic. It creates an order for the referring provider to review. And the referring provider has the opportunity to look at that the recommended follow-up order, as well as all the specific findings from the report while they're reviewing that that recommendation. And they can then create that order for their patients and kind of continue the care from that point forward. All right, so let's talk about a couple other things. So I mentioned in the PowerPoint presentation things like quality checks. So I'll give you an example of how that appears here. 32-year-old female patient presents with chest pain, period. So in this case, the system knows based on the procedure data that the patient is really a male patient. And in this case, I dictated female patient, and the NLP running in the background has identified the fact that there is a gender mismatch. It's alerted you here in the Smart Assist tab. So you could choose to deal with this now, or you could choose to postpone it and deal with it at a later time before you sign off on the report. There's a couple different ways that we indicate that there's something that you need to look at. First, we display it all over here within the Smart Assist tab. And then over here on the left-hand side of the report, you'll also see an indication that there's something wrong with this snippet of text that was dictated. So in this case, I simply just need to select female, male. And again, as the engine looks at the text as it's being dictated, it realizes that something's been fixed and that recommendation falls off the screen. So you no longer need to track it. So I also want to talk a little bit more about this prior reports tab. Again, you can see here you have access to all the prior reports as you're used to having within PowerScribe. But in this case, we've highlighted it, the relevant priors in a different darker blue color, again, bringing it to your attention. These relevant priors are identified based on the modality, the body part, and then also the date and time. And we elevate those to the top. So it's easier for you to access the prior reports and you can look at them. But again, you still have access to everything if you want to look into that deeper. The other feature that we've added that we've received a lot of really positive feedback on is what we call our heads up display. So you can see over here on the left-hand side of the screen, there's some important information in terms of your dictating status, the different fields. And what you can do now is you can actually undock that from PowerScribe and create a floating window. And you can move this floating window anywhere onto your screen. And most importantly, you can move it over your PAC system. You can adjust the transparency of it. So it's as translucent or transparent or not transparent as you'd like. And what this allows you to do, again, is keep your eyes focused on the images. With this piece over within the PACS viewer space, you can keep your eyes on the PACS and keep your eyes on your interpretation. You can see whether you're in a dictating mode. You can see which field within the report that you're in. You can see if there's any alerts. All that information is displayed inside the HUD. Again, allowing you to keep your eyes focused on maybe one or two monitors rather than having to constantly look over to the PowerScribe monitor as you're doing your interpretation. And this window itself is sticky, meaning wherever you position it is where it will stay the next time you open it. But if you simply want to return it to the PowerScribe window, you can just click the dock button again, and it snaps right back into place. All right, so let me close out of this exam real quick, and I want to give you an example of what ambient mode looks like. Now, if you remember from the presentation portion of it, ambient mode is a way for you to create a structured report that's dictated in a non-structured manner. So your institution can come up with a series of templates that present data in a way that's very consistent to your referring physicians or other users. But as a radiologist, you may not want to dictate in that fashion. You may want to dictate as you're scrolling through the images and identifying findings, not have to dictate a lungs field first and an abdomen field next. And this is what ambient mode allows you to do. So let me pull up a new exam to give you an example of what this looks like. So as always, when you load the exam into PowerScribe, it's going to apply the appropriate template based on the type of exam that you're reading. And you can see here, it's going to load a very structured template. And I'm simply going to select ambient mode, and I'm going to do some quick dictation of findings here. There's a 3-centimeter liver lesion noted in the right lobe, period. There's a 12-millimeter solid pulmonary nodule in the right upper lobe, period. There's a small left pleural effusion that is unchanged, period. The heart is slightly enlarged, period. There's a small pericardial infusion, which was not previously seen, period. Apply findings. So in this case, our NLP engine has gone through and looked at the text that was dictated, and it's identified where there's matching fields for each of those findings, and it's automatically applied the findings into the report. So you can see here the liver lesion matched with the liver field. You can see with plural, it applied in this field as well. Again, it looks at what you're dictating and tries to find a field that matches in terms of the dictated text. If there's findings that don't match up to the specific fields, we actually automatically generate an unmatched findings section at the bottom of the findings field so that you can go through and review those results as well. And you'll notice once again that, as we're dictating, our NLP engine is running clinical guidance, is making alerts and recommendations. So it's identifying here that we dictated something about a pulmonary nodule. We could hop into the clinical guidance experience for that, for liver lesion as well. And then it's also recognizing there's some potential actionable findings associated with these interpretations. Again, alerting you here in the Smart Assist pane, and then also right here in line with your diagnostic report. All right, so I'm going to take just 1 minute here, and I'm going to change gears, and I'm going to log out of this version of the application, and I'm going to load another environment that we have that we use to do our integration testing. So I'm going to load an example of a PAC system as well as PowerScribe 1. So if you could just give me 1 second, I'm going to stop sharing my screen as I switch things around. So the next piece that I want to speak to you about is a new integration solution that we have that we're introducing with PowerScribe 1 that we've branded PowerCast. Now, PowerCast is based on an emerging standard sponsored by HL7. It's called Firecast. And what it allows us to do is deliver real-time sharing of data on the desktop between one and many applications. Traditional integration strategies have typically been one-to-one, like PowerScribe to PACS or PowerScribe to some sort of AI system. But what PowerCast allows us to do is have multiple applications on the desktop sharing information in real time. It also allows us to extend a component of our speech engine that we call our virtual assistant, which enables the radiologist to use their voice to drive workflow and functionality, not only within the PowerScribe application, but into integrated applications as well. This is kind of like your Smart Assist, if you will, or your Google Assist, things like that, but more with a radiology mind. So as I mentioned, Firecast is an emerging standard sponsored by HL7. It's broadly participated in by a lot of the radiology vendors that are out there, from PACS, EMR to reporting. And what we've noticed from Nuance is that the amount of data that the radiologist has to process from day to day, this gets back to kind of the fatigue part of it, the data is becoming more and more complex. It's coming from more and more systems. And that we feel strongly that a standards-based integrated solution to address those complex data needs is really paramount. And so from a Nuance PowerScribe perspective, we're heavily invested in this Firecast community and moving this standard forward because it does some really key things for us. It allows us to provide a common language for these multiple applications to share data between each other. And that really does help reduce some of the complexity and the ambiguity when it comes to sharing data from system to system. It allows you to do things like make measurements in your PAC system and have those automatically flow into your report and create a link in the back end between those things. So every time you're referencing a finding within the report, you can also automatically sync to the same images within the diagnostic image. And it really provides this common language for all these applications to communicate with each other on. So what you're going to see from a Nuance perspective is a large push with the vendors in the industry to move towards this PowerCast-based integration. We've already spoken with a lot of them already. Some of them have already picked it up and become early adopters. Again, a lot of them are working within the standards committee, and we think this is going to be a really important moving forward. And it also provides some really powerful features for you as users as you're doing your day-to-day reading. So a little bit more about PowerCast. Maybe this is a little bit on the technical side, so I won't spend too much time here. But PowerCast actually lives up in the Azure cloud. It's an extension of PowerScribe, if you will, and it's a hub that sits out there within the cloud. And applications can choose to subscribe to events that get broadcast out on the hub, or they can choose to publish data up to that. So it's a pub-sub model, meaning you can choose to publish anything you want up there. And then as an application connected to it, you get to determine if it's something that you want to listen to. So for example, say we have a voice come in and the radiologist says, hey, Barco, turn on spot view. Well, Barco knows that they need to listen to that, but maybe the Visage PAC system doesn't, as an example. Everything is tied together by a topic. So as you log on as a radiologist to the workstation, your user ID is your topic, and your topic is broadcast out to the hub, and all the integrated applications on your desktop know to listen to your topic. And that's how we do the data synchronization at a technical level. And again, this can do things like our traditional integrations do, like share user and patient context, but it also allows you to share some complex data, reference measurements, and things like comparison exams as well. And the other piece that this does for us is it really allows us to simplify our validation strategy. So, there's multiple EMR and PACS vendors out there in the community. And typically what happens is when you want to do a PowerScribe upgrade, you need to talk to your PACS vendor and say, okay, do you guys support the latest version of PowerScribe? Well, because PowerCast and FireCast is a standard, we'll kind of reach that level of maturity at some point soon. We're not going to be making a whole lot of changes to it, which means the integration, the validation happens between your PACS vendor and PowerCast. So that allows you to kind of upgrade all the applications on the side a little bit more freely because the compatibility is maintained with the hub itself. And again, what this allows us to do when you're doing your interpretation is allows the report to populate dynamically. Again, I've spoken a couple of times about how we really want you to be able to keep your eyes on the images, on what's important to you, and trust that the data is flowing into the report in real time into the appropriate places. And that's really what this allows us to do. And again, I referenced a little bit about how speech can also be leveraged through Virtual Assistant within this application. So we can use this to drive some simple commands and even some complex exams out to other applications. So we've done some work with PACS vendors to basically completely automate, not automate, but to augment the user workflow by driving all commands through voice. So you could say, navigate to the next sequence or change my hanging protocol. And we've also been able to integrate to other supporting products like Barco, where they have drivers on their desktop, on their monitors that you can invoke directly through voice. So I want to hop in and do a quick example here of what PowerCast looks like in action. So for this demonstration here, I do have one of our partners, Visage, being used as the PACS, and I've got PowerScribe 1 pulled up over here. And I'm going to launch one of my exams. It's a screening memo within the Visage PACS. And just like you're used to seeing already, as the exam loads within the PACS system, that information is going to pass over into the PowerScribe report. And again, it takes a little bit of time, and I apologize for it with this integrated environment, but it speeds up as we go forward as soon as it loads. It's going to load the appropriate template and give you an opportunity to start doing your interpretation. So one of the most common requests that we receive when it comes to integration is, how do I auto-populate my comparison data into the report? Today, you have to dictate manually everything that you use as a comparison exam. And so one of the first features that we worked with Visage on was how do we auto-populate comparisons? So here within my viewer pane, you can see my current study down here, kind of with the white overlay, and my priors are up here in red. And if I select one of my priors and I choose the option for set comparison, that comparison information automatically goes into the report and it populates into the comparison field. Similarly, Visage has a work in progress AI system to automatically calculate breast density. And so as a user, I can say, okay, go ahead and send that calculation over to PowerScribe. And you can see it appeared over here in the findings section. It automatically generated the label, and then it populated it with a value of C heterogeneously dense. And that's one of the neat things that we can do now with this PowerCast type integration is we don't need to have fields necessarily holding a place within the report that may or may not get populated with data. We can get a finding from an outside system, recognize what type of finding that is, generate the label, and then apply the text. Let me just zoom in here on this image. So Visage also has a tool that they call semantic annotations. It's the ability to create a measurement and have a label automatically applied based on the body part that you're in. So in this case, I'm going to choose a lesion size measurement, and I'm going to go ahead and measure this lesion size right here. And you can see over here, we have the lesion size measurement, and it automatically populates into the report. It knows that it's a part of the left breast and that there's 105 millimeters for the measurement. Similarly, I can take another tool here, distance from nipple. And again, I can create another measurement. And again, that measurement is going to automatically populate over into the report into the right template section. Now, a couple things that I want to highlight here. Again, how this text is generated, you have complete control over it. It's part of the system of defining it. What we've done is we've codified these different measurements. So in the back end, Visage is telling us that we have a distance from nipple for the left breast via a code. And we map that code to the specific findings into the specific area of the template that you want it to map into. And that's how it flowed over here. So you can choose how you want this text structured and generated. You have complete control over that. And not only do we get the measurement here within the PowerScribe report, but behind the scenes, not visible to the user, but associated with this specific finding are things like the study instance UID, the specific series and image where this finding occurred. And we can use that to do things like right-clicking on the finding and choose this option, send via PowerCast. That's a broadcast out to the PowerCast hub, asking all the integrated applications to resync that specific finding. So if you're in a multi-slice CT and you choose this option, we're going to navigate the PACS viewer back to that specific section where that slice occurred. Now, the next evolution of this, and I can't show it to you today because it's still a work in progress, but the next piece that we're working on is multimedia. So that's the ability to leverage PowerCast to not only send over these measurements, but actually take a snapshot of this key image and bring it over with that measurement and make it referenceable within the PowerScribe report. That's something we hope to have done later on this summer, but you can see how these technologies are very much related to each other. All right, that was a lot done in 25 minutes. I appreciate you guys sticking with me. I know that there's some questions out there, so let me see if I can get to some of the questions. Or Andrea, do you want to read those off to me? I'm not sure. Oh, here we go.
So we did have one come in through the chat that said, can PowerCast insert into the report any priors viewed on the PACS?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so the answer is yes. It really comes down to how the PACS vendor chooses to implement it. And we've had some really interesting conversations with radiologists over the past year about how this should be done. Some want it to happen as soon as the prior is loaded on the report. Some don't want it to happen until they actually click on and start navigating through the prior. And some want it to be a more manual process, kind of like you saw here, where I voice dictate add comparison, or I choose a button and say add comparison. I think a lot of it depends on the type of user you are. Take like a resident, for example, who tend to touch a lot more studies maybe. You may not want that full list of comparisons listed in your report. So I think when it comes down to it, it's going to depend on how we implement it with the specific viewer, and probably also lead to some user preferences in terms of how that gets consumed.
Great, thank you. And we did have another one, Tanner. How much back-end prep configuration does my team need to do to make ambient mode work?
So this is where I might need to call a phone a friend for some help on it, but I'm going to take a stab at it, right? So the ambient mode that we have here in PowerScribe 1 is vastly different than it was in PowerScribe 360. PowerScribe 360 required a lot of manual configurations and mappings. In this case, we've really let our NLP engine take control of that. So the NLP is leveraging the text that's dictated, and it's trying to match it to a field within your report. So I believe that there's very little setup to none setup that you need to do. But Nathan, can you expand upon that, please?
Yeah, sure. That was a perfect response, Tanner. It is all automated through our NLP engine, which is a constantly learning and improving system as the ambient mode feature gets used. Additionally, if there was any concerns on the results that are coming back from ambient mode, you can certainly go into PowerScribe and override that on the template at the template level to get a more accurate experience or a more broad experience if you needed to.
Thank you. And another question just came in. How many of these features are sold in PowerScribe 1 and how many are add-ons? And then asked about PowerCast, Firecast, follow-up Visage.
Yep. So with PowerScribe 1, we've really tried to simplify the sales model by not making these all add-on components. All the features that I demonstrated here are kind of part of the core PowerScribe offering.
Perfect. Yay was the response to that. So I love it. So that looks like that's all the questions that I see. If I missed any in the chat, I apologize. So feel free to send them through. And then I did send a message to everyone to just make sure your bourbon is prepped. We'll be moving to that in just a second. So make sure you've poured your bourbon into the sample cups and place them on the tasting mat. So you're ready to go. It looks like we have one more question.
Sure.
And then we can move forward. How many PACS systems are compatible with PowerCast?
That is a great question, and I had a slide that I forgot to share for it. So let me just share real quick, and I'll show you, give you a view of it. So I anticipated it, but forgot to go back. All right, so we've spoken with the majority of the vendors that are out there within the PACS sphere. The ones that we've worked closest with so far are with Visage Imaging, Siemens Health, Mach 7 with their eUnity viewer, used to be Client Outlook, and Sectra. Those are PACS viewers. Inference Analytics is actually an AI solution that automatically generates impressions text by looking at the content of the report. So you can see how PowerCast can really extend beyond just reporting and packs into other solutions like AI. We also have commitment from Change Health, Fuji, and Agfa to start working on it this spring into early summer. And then again, we're talking to all the other vendors that are out there, but these are the ones that are probably the furthest along right now. What I'll say, I think the parting thing I want to give you on the PowerCast front is with PowerCast, we've built the plumbing, the capability to do this kind of what I think is really neat, exchange of data real time is all there. It's available with PowerScribe 1. But how that data gets consumed and becomes actionable really does become an integration effort between you, your PACS vendor, and us. And so, I look forward to having any conversations with your teams to try to figure out how do we start to implement different use cases to really leverage this power of PowerCast. All right, Andrea, it's back to you again.
All right. Well, I think we are ready to move to the bourbon tasting. So everyone feel free to come on camera with your bourbon tasting setup, and we are going to pass it over to Patrick Garrett with Bourbon and Banter to take us through.
All right. Thank you so much, Andrea. I really appreciate that. And I've gone ahead and spotlighted my video for everyone. So hopefully it's gotten a little bit larger for you, because we're going to do some very fancy things like this. So everything I'm going to talk about and show is going to be through my video feed. So before we get started, just a little housekeeping. As Andrea said, please make sure your whiskey's poured out. You should have received the tasting mat and our bourbon flavor wheel. And a quick note about that flavor wheel, we're going to use that as a reference tool today. So as you are tasting things, it can sometimes be hard to put words to what you're smelling or what you're tasting. So this is a cheat sheet, if you will. But by no means is this an exhaustive list. So if you don't smell or don't taste these flavors, that's okay. There's no right answers. There's no test. And if you smell things or taste things that aren't on this card, you're not defective. It's perfectly legit, right? So if you smell cotton candy, all it means is that you went to the circus a lot as a child and your parents were nicer than mine, because I did not smell cotton candy in a whiskey, right? So just keep that in mind. Use it as a reference, okay? Now, the other thing I want to point out is not everybody has gone to a whiskey tasting, right? But a lot of people have done wine tasting. So the thing to remember is this is not a wine tasting, okay? So the big thing is that when you are tasting, okay, don't stick your nose down in your glass and take a big whiff, because you're going to lose your sense of smell and your sense of taste, and it's going to be like you've gone nose and taste bud deaf, okay? And that's no way to have fun at a whiskey party, right? So far, we've done a lot of these tastings and everyone's had a great time. I don't want you guys to be the first group that doesn't have a good time. So keep your mouth open. So when you go into that glass, keep the mouth open, keep your nose at the top of the glass, and just breathe in gently. You're going to smell better. You're going to have a better experience. For each of the samples, we're going to look at it. We're going to smell it. We're going to taste it. And I'm going to ask you all to try drinking it neat first. Don't put any water in it. Don't put any ice in it. But once you've tasted it, feel free, if you've got it available, you want to put a drop or two of water in, go ahead. If you want to put in a single ice cube, you can do that as well, and see how it changes the flavor, see how it changes the aroma. Okay, so pretty easy ground rules. But before we get going, I like to know what is going on with my crowd. So I've just launched a quick poll question. If you would be so kind to kind of chime in and let me know, what kind of whiskey do you normally drink? And I even have answers for people who don't drink whiskey. But please chime in on that, and we'll get moving here in just a second. All right, so bourbon is coming on strong. I like to see that. Love to see some newbies as well. Hopefully, we'll teach you to drink curious and try something new. Okay, some Scotch drinkers as well. Okay. Keep that open for just a minute longer. But let's go ahead, while we keep that open, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I want you to do is take sample one. All right, I want you to take a look at it in the glass for just a second. And I want you to look at the color. And when you look at the color, the thing to remember is that with bourbon, all right, the darker a bourbon is, it means one of two things. The longer it's been in a barrel, which means the older it is, or it's higher proof, okay? But in most cases, it's going to be that it's a little bit older. So if it's a lighter color, it's younger. If it's darker, it's a little bit older. So as you look at the three bourbons in front of you, you can kind of start getting a sense of which one may be younger or older. But then when you're ready, go ahead and nose it. Remember, keep that mouth open. Give it a small whiff. And this is where the interactive part comes in. What are you smelling? Okay, remember, there's no wrong answer. So I'm looking for some volunteers to chime in and give me a sense of what are you picking up on your nose as you first smell this? All right, I've been given permission to call people out if they don't chime in. Anyone? How about I'm looking right at Kathy Sanders. What are you picking up, Kathy?
I want to say wood.
Wood? Okay, good. That's fair.
Sanders would know.
All right, anybody else picking up something a little bit differently? How about Mark Pena or Perna?
I agree. I taste or smell wood too.
Okay. All right, how about, is anybody picking up any, so some in the chat are saying vanilla, some tobacco, good note, some vanilla and oak. All right, those are all good starting points. All right, if you haven't tried it yet, tasted it, go ahead and take a sip. And for your newbies, take a small sip, right? Let it coat the tip of your tongue to sort of acclimate, and then take a bigger sip after that and see how the flavor changes from the tip of your tongue, which is typically going to pick up sweeter notes, right? May pick up things like vanilla and caramel. And then as it grows across the mid palate, you're going to start picking up more savory notes, as well as things like the oak and spices. And then as you swallow it, okay, what do you taste after you swallow it? That's what we call the finish, right? And the finish is comprised of what you taste after the liquid is out of your mouth. But then also, to me, it's also what sort of sensation does it bring on your tongue, right? Is it spicy? Is it tannic and drying, right? And how long does that finish last? If it's the flavors are gone immediately, that's what we call a short finish. But if the flavors linger around, we go to medium or go to long. So if you get a whiskey that you can taste a minute or two after you've drank it, that is definitely a long finish whiskey. So anybody want to comment on what they tasted compared to what they smelled?
A lot of caramel, I think.
A lot of caramel. Okay, excellent.
Vanilla. I thought the finish was long.
Long. Okay. I've got somebody who commented they experienced some rubbing alcohol. Not uncommon. And I'll give you a tip. If you're on the nose, especially if all you can smell is alcohol and ethanol, go ahead and breathe gently into your glass and then try to smell. That should help dissipate some of that alcohol smell. The other thing is, as you get to sample 2 and 3, the alcohol will become less prominent both on the nose and on the taste buds, because your taste buds will be more used to it or more numb, depending on how you want to look at it. All right, so I'm going to share back here quickly what everybody voted, just so you get a sense of where the results were on that whiskey. So bourbon is definitely the forefront here, so we're all in good company. So thank you very much for sharing on that. I appreciate it. And for you newbies taking a chance as well, appreciate that. So I'm going to go ahead and unveil and talk to you about this one a little bit more detail. But does anybody want to hazard a guess what this is? Anybody think they've had this before? It's a tough thing to guess what a whiskey is, for sure. So I understand if there's no takers in that. Okay, we got somebody, Wendy, guess Jim Beam. All right. Let's go ahead and unveil this.
Will it?
Knob Creek, Widow Jane. All those guesses have one thing in common. They're incorrect. So what we are drinking actually is Wyoming whiskey small batch bourbon. So this is 88 proof, and this is what we call a wheated bourbon. What that means is it's made from a mash bill or a grain recipe of corn and wheat and malted barley. So this is the same type of recipe that is used for Maker's Mark or Larceny or Weller, or even the infamous Pappy Van Winkle, are all great examples of wheated bourbons. And wheated bourbons are great for people who are new to whiskey because they're sweeter and they have a gentler touch on the palate. Okay, so as a general rule, if someone is coming to be new to bourbon and they want to try something for the first time, I'll steer them toward a wheated bourbon. Now, this one does not have an age statement on the bottle, but it is roughly 5 years old. The distiller will put these in barrels and wait. And when it gets close to 5 years, they will start tasting them. And as they start hitting the target flavor profile of the distiller, they will then start to bottle these. And this is actually made in Kirby, Wyoming. Husband and wife are lawyers, created this brand. They hired the former master distiller for Maker's Mark to help them get their distillery up and running, which is one of the reasons they went with a wheated recipe as their flagship brand. To me, this is a great example of a wheated bourbon and a great entry point for people getting into the category. So how did everybody like this one? Had anybody had it before? Any thoughts? All right. Well, if you like wheated bourbons, you're a Maker's Mark fan, this is a great alternative. For me, this has got a lot of floral notes in the nose, a good layer of honey. And what I always like for it is I get a nice kick of orange citrus out of this one. And I really enjoy that because it's a little different. So this is really good in an old fashioned, if you like old fashions because of that citrus. And if you happen to be in a city where a retailer actually does a private barrel selection of Wyoming whiskey, those are going to be from a single barrel. They're going to be higher proof typically, and those really tend to amp up the citrus orange notes in it. So if you like that sort of thing, I highly recommend you check this one out. All right. Now, once again, feel free to ask questions as we go. You can chime them out, or you can put them in the chat session. And if I don't get to it directly, I will stick around at the end of my presentation and answer any questions that people may have. All right, so I'm glad some people are liking it and they're enjoying it. Very good. So real quick, we've just had our first bourbon, right? But what is bourbon? This is probably the biggest questions I get from people, especially people that are new to whiskey. And they say, well, is bourbon a whiskey or is whiskey a bourbon? Well, the reality is that all bourbons are whiskeys, but not all whiskeys are bourbons. And what I mean by that is whiskey is a big category, right? It is a alcohol distilled from a recipe of grains, of mash fermented grains, and they're distilled, right? So Scotch is a whiskey, Japanese whiskey is a whiskey, Canadian whiskey, Irish whiskey, bourbon, okay? They're all whiskeys. Bourbon, though, is probably one of the most, I would say, restricted and specialized types of whiskeys there are. First and foremost, it has to be made in the United States. I don't know if anybody's on this event from Kentucky, but contrary to what Kentuckians would tell you, bourbon does not have to be made in Kentucky. Now, arguably, all the good stuff is made in Kentucky. At least that's what the Kentuckians tell me. But the reality is that actually 95% of the world's bourbon is made in Kentucky because it has been the ground floor of bourbon distilling for over a century. Okay, so it has to be made anywhere in America. The next thing to know is that grain recipe, or what we refer to as the mash bill, has to be made of at least 51% corn. Okay, from there you can add wheat, you can add rye, you can add malted barley. Some places will experiment with things like quinoa and brown rice and millet, but the standard profiles are going to be wheat, rye, corn, and malted barley. The next thing that makes bourbon unique is it has to be aged in a brand new charred oak container. Now, a couple things there. I said container. It doesn't have to be a barrel. It can actually, you can take a brand new oak bucket, char it, put new distillate in it, take it to table and drink it, and you could have bourbon. It'd be the worst bourbon you've ever had, but it can be done. Thankfully, somebody said, hey, barrels are better, easy to transport, provide better aging experience. So we standardize. The big distilleries will use 53-gallon barrels, and then it has to be a brand new charred container. So once that barrel is used for bourbon and the bourbon is put in a bottle, it can no longer be used to make bourbon fresh off the still. Okay, this is compare and contrast to Scotland or Ireland, where they tend to use used barrels, and most of those used barrels come from bourbon manufacturers, right? So those barrels, once they're done in Kentucky, they'll disassemble them, but they'll put them on a boat, they ship them to Scotland where they're put back together and used to age Scotch or Irish whiskey or Japanese whiskey. They're also used for things like bourbon barrel aged beers, aging soy sauce. They're even used now to make furniture. It's gotten so much that a used barrel is worth more than a brand new barrel. It's got sort of the whiskey patina, if you will, in that as well. The other three things real quick is when it comes off the still, no higher than 160 proof, because we don't want to become vodka. We want to leave flavor in it. It gets put in the barrel no higher than 125 proof, which means you have to add something to lower that proof. Well, with bourbon, the only thing you can add is water. And the same thing goes for when it comes out of that barrel and put into that bottle. If you want to lower the proof to the minimum proof of 80, you can add nothing but water. Once again, compared to Scotch and Irish whiskey, they can add caramel coloring to their whiskeys by law. With bourbon, you can add nothing but water. Okay, so when we come back to the issue of color, with bourbon, if it's darker, it's probably older. With Scotch and with Irish whiskey, since they can add caramel coloring, and most do, it's a little hard to judge the age based solely on the color of the liquid because of that reason. So, and the last thing is there is no legal requirement for how old a bourbon has to age. In Scotland and Ireland, the whiskey has to be aged for a minimum of 3 years. Kentucky bourbon or any bourbon in the United States can be aged as long as a second and still be legally called bourbon. Once again, you're going to probably have some pretty crappy bourbon if it's only 30 seconds old, closer to moonshine, right? So why pay the premium? Just get the moonshine. But luckily, people age it longer. If it's less than 4 years old, they have to put an age statement on the bottle. So if you're partial to Jim Beam White Label, you'll notice there's no age statement on that because it is just a hair over 4 years old. And if a bourbon distillery that you like tends to blend some of their different ages together, let's say they blend an 8 and a 10-year-old whiskey and they want to put an age on the bottle to help sell it, they have to put the age of the youngest whiskey of the blend. So an 8-year-old would be the proper statement for that. So that's a little 411 on bourbon. Any questions before we go into the second sample? All right, very good. So if you will, go ahead and take sample number 2. We're going to do the same drill here. Take a look at it and smell it. I'll call your attention, though, if you look at the color compared to this one to the first one, you're going to see that this is going to be a lot darker than that first one, right? You've got your own screens, you can see it, but there is a significant difference in the color. All right, so one could tend to say, well, number 2 might be a little bit older, right? So keep that in mind. And as you smell it, how does the aroma of this one differ from the first one, right? So a lot of people said, I got some vanilla, I got some caramel, a little bit of oak. What are you getting on the second one that is different?
Cherry.
Right? Cherry. Oh, great. Good nose. Excellent. Butterscotch. Somebody says it's sweet. All right. Definitely cherry. Fruit note. Good. All excellent notes. All right. And then as you switch to taste it, do those aromas translate to your palate, right? So that's always interesting. People are like, oh, it smells like cherries. I'm going to love it. They taste it and they're like, oh my God, I can't taste any cherries. What the hell did you give me? Right?
It's a little sweeter. Tastes a little sweeter.
Okay. So what you're experiencing here is likely, since we know it's darker, right? For me, there's more pronounced oak, right? So the first one, to get kind of like a light oak, right? Almost like a toasted oak. With this one, I get more robust oak. It's sweeter smelling and it's darker. All those things point to this is an older whiskey, right? Because as you sit in a barrel for a longer period of time and pick up more of those oak notes, it can actually come across as sweet wood on the nose. Okay, go ahead and try it if you haven't. Now, is it sweet on the palate as well as the nose? Okay. Are you picking up anything else from this one? Okay. So for me, I start picking up, in addition to that oak, I get some, what I'll describe as leather. And I know that's weird because you're like, how do you know what leather tastes like? Well, I played a lot of baseball when I was younger, so didn't go to the circus. I was playing baseball, and I'd be out in the outfield bored, and you inevitably take that leather glove when you're about 7 years old, start chewing on a tassel, right? That's what leather tastes like. Okay. So I can blame it on being an 8-year-old kid, right? That I do that. But that's how we start classifying what we smell and taste, right? It's all from experience. If you've never had marzipan, you can't tell me something smells or tastes like marzipan, right? So as people look to say, hey, I want to get better at tasting whiskey, you not only have to do the hard work of drinking more whiskey, but you also need to start being purposeful with the things that you taste, right? And taste something, go to your spice drawer and smell things, right? And start visualizing what those are. So the next time you go to try a whiskey, they can be a little bit, toward the top of your mind. All right, does anybody want to take a wild guess at what this one is?
I think it's a higher proof, though.
Higher proof, okay.
Definitely more aged.
Okay. Someone says it's sharper with more charred notes,
Mhm.
not as sweet on the palate. Okay. Excellent. All right, let's go ahead and unveil this one.
I don't know.
So this is Russell's Reserve 10 year. So this is 10 years old. So once again, all those signs pointing to an older whiskey were spot on, right? The first one was around 5 years old. This is almost double the age. Okay, so the color, the oak, the leather, if you picked up some tobacco, all those things come out of those barrels over the years, right? Once you start getting past that 4 to 6 year range, they start coming out in spades. This has got a mash bill of 75% corn, 13% rye, 12% malted barley. So this is what we call a traditional mash bill in the terms of bourbon, right? So if someone said, hey, what's a really kind of like prototypical bourbon smell and flavor? This would be a great whiskey to present to them, right? The other thing that's really pronounced in this one for me is it has a little bit of what I call a DNA, and that is a baking spice flavor profile on the nose and on the palate. This is a wild turkey product, and wild turkey products are known for that baking spice DNA note, if you will. Because wild turkey, which I think is one of the most underrated distilleries in the country, you know, most people think it's bourbon for old men, bikers, and badasses, right? Because that's how it was marketed for decades. It's actually amazing whiskey, okay? But the other thing is, wild turkey makes one bourbon recipe. And they take that one recipe, put it in barrels, and based on where they put it in the warehouses, how long they age it for, and how they blend it, they have at least 6 different brand expressions on the retail shelves at all times, plus several limited edition releases they put out. That all comes from one recipe, which I think is pretty amazing. They're not the only distiller to do that. For those of you who are a little bit of on the bourbon geek side of things, Pappy Van Winkle is actually the same thing as Buffalo Trace's Weller bourbon, which up until the last couple of years, you could buy a bottle of Weller for as low as $20, depending on the expression that you got. And now those same bottles, because they know it's Pappy Jr., those same $20 bottles now, if you can find them, are going for hundreds of dollars, which is absolutely mind-blowing, right? All right. So I'm taking a look at the notes here real quick. Don't tell people about wild turkey. Yes, several wineries will use whiskey barrels, bourbon barrels for aging wine, especially big red Cabernets will be aged in bourbon barrels. Somebody said they got clove hints. Okay, they asked about the graphics later. I will talk to Andrea about that. Whatever I can do, I will take care of that for you guys. Absolutely. So how did you guys think about this one? How did it compare to number 1?
I liked it better. More body, more full to me.
Okay, excellent. More complex, much better,
Yep.
smoother. Okay, excellent. All right, good. Hopefully now, earlier when the call hadn't started, someone had asked me what some of my favorite everyday bourbons that I would like to drink. So when stores around me, or even stores that I find online, will do a private barrel selection of Russell's Reserve, I love those. I would drink those every day. When Bourbon and Banter, when we go down and do barrel selections, we always do Russell's Reserve. Those picks, okay, come from a single barrel. They're actually bottled at 110 proof. So there's more proof to it, which gives a richer, a thicker mouthfeel, and it's delicious. So if you like this and you want to amp it up a notch, and you're at one of your local retailers and they've got a single barrel version of Russell's Reserve, I highly recommend you grab at least 2 bottles because I think you'll like it that much if you've liked this one. All right. All right. Any questions as we move on? Yep. All right. Okay, well, this is enjoyable. Somebody's working, unable to participate. Well, hopefully you remember this and enjoy the whiskeys later. All right, so real quick, I want to talk about the other side. So we talked about a little bit about that distilling, right? 160 proof, 125, 80 proof. That's the science behind whiskey making. The art is the barrel aging, okay, or the barrel maturation, as it's called. And that's because 100% of a bourbon's color comes from the barrel, and between 40 and 70% of the flavor actually comes from that barrel. I don't know if you've ever seen what a barrel looks like, but they will take a barrel and they will, before they put the top and the bottom on, which are called the heads, before the heads are put in the barrel, they will put it over an open flame and they will launch that flame up and they will char those barrels. And when they char a barrel, the inside of the barrel winds up looking like this. Okay. It's dark black. It looks like the back of an alligator, right? It's got all these crinkles in it. In fact, when they char it to what's called a level 4, that's called an alligator char. because it's even more pronounced in this. This is a level 3 char. But an interesting thing happens with that char, right? That char layer is subtractive. And what we mean by that is when the whiskey interacts with that layer, it actually starts filtering out a lot of the nasty chemicals and elements that we don't want in the whiskey. So in a way, it's smoothing out the rough edges, right? But then between that char layer and the actual wood, all right, you get what's called the red line. And it's hard to see in this, but there's actually a layer of caramelized sugar between the charcoal and the wood. So what happens is throughout the seasons, as the liquid gets warmer, right, it gets hot outside, the liquor will expand, push through that charcoal, start smoothing out the edges. It will go through that red line, start picking up sugar and color, like an amber color. Then it'll go into that bare wood and it'll start picking up more of the wood notes, right? As well as some of the tannins that are so prominent in a whiskey. Then it gets cold and it cools down and it contracts back out. And it repeats this season after season. And along with that, there are microcurrents that are going on in the barrel. So the liquid is always moving around, even if it's not perceptible to the human eye, right? And that's how the aging imparts all that magic. And then the position in the warehouse or the rick house, as I kind of interchange what I call them, there's several stories in a rick house. Buffalo Trace, one of the biggest distillers, is building a new rick house every 4 months currently. And each of those rick houses will house 58,000 barrels of whiskey. Oh my goodness, 58,000 barrels. I mean, there are now over, I think it's close to 2.5 barrels of whiskey per person in the state of Kentucky. It's tremendous. And just 7 years ago, it was only a little over 1. So the industry has exploded. But in those rick houses, those barrels on those top floors, it gets really hot, over 105, 110 degrees. Those barrels age aggressively. They evaporate faster. It raises the proof of those barrels, right? The water goes first, then alcohol will start to evaporate. And that creates what we call the angel's share, which is the whiskey, the bourbon you can smell in the air, right? So if you walk into one of these warehouses, it smells divine. And you should not light a cigarette, right? You don't want to have that explode, but it is the most magical place to be. I think somebody should take old rick houses and like have some sort of new modern burial ceremony there. It would be fantastic. There'd be a lot of takers for that. But on the bottom floors, right, it's cool, right? The temperatures are down in the mid to high 70s, but it's consistent. So those barrels age more gracefully. And in fact, it can get so cool sometimes that the proof of the barrels, instead of going up due to evaporation, the proof will actually go down because it pulls in moisture from the surrounding air, right? So you get high proof at the top, low proof at the bottom, aggressively aged, smoothly aged, and then everything in between. So the real art is the master distillers then picking barrels from different floors and blending them together to create something unique. So if you turn back to Wild Turkey with their 6 different expressions, that's all because they have different warehouses, different floors, and the warehouses just being in a different location can affect how things age. And then you divide that by all the variables inside: floor, which rick they sit in, what was the temperatures like during a certain season. So it's really an art because it's hard to control. But that's how you get such unique flavor profiles and differences between whiskeys. So if you get a chance to go down to Kentucky, visit a distillery, make sure you take a tour that takes you into a rick house and lets you walk around. And as a bucket list, something to shoot for is make friends with a local retailer and find a way to go down when they do a single barrel pick and go along, because really there's nothing better than being in a warehouse, them rolling out barrels for you and drinking directly from the barrels. It's truly magical. All right, so now let's go ahead and try sample 3 here. Remember, keep that mouth open. You guys are getting bold probably after drinking 2, but keep it open. And how does this one smell differently from the other ones, right? I want to volunteer their feedback. Not as strong, okay. Some citrus, good.
Yeah, almost more floral and gentler.
Floral. Okay, floral and gentler, okay, good. Excellent observation. So I get, for me, there's definitely some spice on the nose in this one. I get those fruits, right? Sort of like pears. And I also get a little bit of cocoa, right? Every once in a while I'm doing a whiskey that oak note comes through, and
It almost smells like dusty cocoa. When I say dusty cocoa, I'm talking about like, being a kid and finding the thing of Hershey's baking chocolate and smelling it and like, oh, that smells good. Just don't stick your finger in it and try to eat it because it's bitter, right? But that's what I think of when I say dusty cocoa. And then on the palate, right, that spice continues. Some more of those fruits. It is full body, right? So this is a good mouthfeel, but it's gentle. And the finish is a medium to long for me. It's not a super strong finish, but it's definitely there. So I'm going to go ahead and someone says very long lasting finish, hits the mouth and almost chewy. I like the use of chewy. I use that all the time. When it's got a good mouthfeel to it and you just kind of like almost smacking your lips a little bit, right? So there's a couple of people who sound like they know what they're doing. Feel free to do what I call the Kentucky chew. So this is an advanced tactic where you take a little whiskey and you actually chew on it. Just be careful. If you're not ready, you might wind up doing a spit take, but it looks a little bit something ridiculous like this. That'll really explode it on your palate, right? It allows you to taste it. You're gonna make a little grimace of a face as well. You can't even help it, but man, you get the full flavor and range of a whiskey when you do that. All right. Any guesses on this one before I unveil?
Definitely a grimace.
Absolutely.
I really like it.
Like it? Excellent. All right. Somebody's got a couple guesses. Elijah Craig, Woodford Reserve, all solid guesses.
Yeah, kind of I like the Buffalo Trace line, so it's something similar to that. It's a little more gentle, though. I don't know.
Okay. Good.
Elmer Teatley. I don't know.
All right. So this is for single barrel.
Okay.
All right. So this is 100 proof, so a little bit higher proof, right? This is what we call high rye bourbon because the rye grains in this are above 18%. All right. Somebody actually has this, so excellent. This one comes in at 35% rye. So this is a fairly high rye bourbon. Now, what's unique about Four Roses is Four Roses actually has two different mash bills, two different grain recipes. All right. They have a grain recipe that has 35% rye. They have another recipe that has 20% rye. They also have 5 different yeast strains. Okay. Yeast is a key component of making bourbon. So they have the ability to create 10 different recipes of bourbon, which is unheard of. And then depending on the different bottles, they will blend those. So if you go to the store and buy their, what used to be called yellow label, right? So somebody's saying their great grandmother drank Four Roses every night before bed. She's probably drinking what was called yellow label. It's now a tan label now. That's a blend, right? Then you've got their small batch, which is a blend. This is a single barrel. So this one is actually the mash bill, which is OBSV, all right? And I know it's a little hard to see in my chart, but O, okay, stands for the fact that it is actually made by Four Roses in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, right? So that's what the O stands for. The B means that it's the higher rye content mash bill. The S means that it is a straight whiskey, and then the V is the yeast strain. And this yeast strain contributes a fruit character into it, makes it a little bit fruitier and a little lighter along with that spice. Now, a little bit of history. Four Roses used to be owned by Seagram's, and Seagram's had a huge discipline around quality control. They had all these yeast strains. And that translated into what Four Roses is today. Now, a little bit more trivia is if you are a fan of Bullet bourbon, Bullet was making all of their bourbon at Four Roses for years. In fact, most of the Bullet you're still getting in the shelves is actually made at Four Roses. And they've actually released an expression in the Bullet line where they start touting their 10 recipes to create their bourbon. So they are actually talking about the whiskey that was distilled by Four Roses. They've switched where they're making it now. So in time, that'll change out. But if you like Four Roses or you like Bullet, they're not 100% interchangeable, but they're pretty darn close. And this higher rye content, when I start to drink my cocktails, as someone who's been drinking whiskey a long time, I like higher rye, spicier whiskeys into my things like the Old Fashions and the Manhattans or Boulevardier, because I want a little bit more of the whiskey to pop versus an entry-level drinker who would be better suited with a wheated whiskey or bourbon in their drink. So that's great. So someone says, yeah, the full those Bullets single barrel picks are great when you can't find Four Roses. So great. So I hope you guys like this one as well. I'm going to go ahead and throw up one last poll here just to get people to vote. And while you're doing that, one last thing is that Nuance will be sending this out to everybody, but if you've enjoyed this and you want to spend some of your time at home doing tastings with family or friends, we're going to send you a link and a code where you can download your own tasting mat template. So you can create your own tasting mat, whether it's 3 whiskeys, 5 whiskeys, and you can send those via PDF or whatnot to friends and family, and hopefully help spread what I call the bourbon gospel, and get involved. Is a great way to spend your time. And then obviously, if you've enjoyed this, please check out our website, which is bourbonbanter.com. This is my personal email address. If you ever have any questions about bourbon or whiskey, send me a note. Just don't email me while you're in the store trying to pick something out, because I don't respond that quickly. But if you're looking to bring something to a party, special gift, or just want to learn no more, drop me a note. I'll be glad to help out any way I can. And with that said, I'm open to any questions that anybody may have. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to Andrea and the Nuance crew.
Yeah, while we wait for some questions to roll in, I don't know if you want to share the results of that last poll first.
Absolutely, thank you.
Great.
So it looks like the Russell's Reserve is the big winner, followed by the Four Roses and then the Wyoming. So thank you.
So I am sharing my screen. I don't know if you're going to have to spotlight me, Patrick, for folks to see it. Can you just confirm you can see that?
No, we can see it.
You can. Okay, great.
Yep.
So just while questions are coming in super quickly, I've received a lot of questions about the recording. Everyone will get an email tomorrow that will give them a link to access that recording, so you can watch it on your own.
Cool.
And then I did just want to mention, please join us next week for our next session, which is a panel presentation with 3 radiologists who are going to be speaking to us about the burnout challenge and how they're kind of proactively addressing it. So you can register for that session if you haven't already at nuance.com/the-challenge. And then I am going to put a brief survey in the chat as well. If anyone wants to take the time to do that for us, that would be great. And that's all I have. So I'll give it back to you, Patrick, to answer any questions that came in.
All right, thank you. All right, so somebody asked what my favorite was, and I said that it was Four Roses out of these 3. Absolutely. I don't see any other questions, so I apologize if I'm not seeing it. If anybody has one verbally they want to toss it out there, happy to answer.
Yeah. Hey, Patrick, I seem to be really attracted to the Buffalo Trace line, all the way up from the basic, all the way up to the what characteristics am I liking? I mean, so what's consistent from, you know, the basic, you know, Buffalo Trace, or even below that at benchmark or whatever it's called, all the way up to, you know, Pappy's, you know, through Eagle Rare and Weller and you know, Blanton's. I just like it all. What am I liking?
Well, you know, unfortunately, it's not so easy, because you're saying you like them all, right? So because Buffalo Trace is 2 mash bills, right? So if you're liking ones from both mash bill lines, it's not the mash bill. You know, I think really one of the reasons that Buffalo Trace is simply enjoyed by so many is it's just great quality whiskey. I mean, they do a fantastic job, right? There's no doubt about it. So I can't point to something specifically in there that is the reason. But you know, it's so good, and unfortunately, it's so hard to get so much of it, right? Somebody asked in the chat, they're like, "What's my thoughts on Blanton's, and why is it so hard to find?" I have lots of thoughts on Blanton's. It's hard to find because there's not that much of it. Most of the Blanton's goes overseas, because what a lot of people don't know is mash bill number 2, which is the mash bill that Buffalo Trace uses for Blanton's and Elmer T. Lee and Rock Hill Farms, actually is not owned by Buffalo Trace. It's owned by a Japanese company. And when Blanton's was created, it wasn't created for the US market. It was created for their Japanese client, for the Japanese market originally. Because the Japanese were such great stewards of bourbon when Americans weren't drinking bourbon. So they had that created. They own the rights to that. So that's why there's always been for years 3 to 4 expressions of Blanton's that go overseas, when we only had 1 in our market until recently, right? So that's one of it. The other thing is Buffalo Trace will deny this to the end, but what they want people to know is that scarcity is actually part of their business
Yeah.
So the fact that things are scarce is not just because they don't have it, it's because they control the allocation of it very strategically, which is frustrating.
Yeah.
They've been
Yeah.
building all these new warehouses, and I was real excited about it, right? Everyone's like, oh, more warehouses, more availability. But it was just announced last week, Budweiser just signed a deal to bring Fireball to China. So a lot of that whiskey is going to be going into Fireball to China. So if you're a Fireball fan, plenty of that to go around.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for that.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
I thought most of Fireball was Canadian rye.
It is a lot of it, but at the same time, you have to remember what is actually going to be going into those warehouses. Is it all new make? Is it going to be some of that being shipped down for aging and processing? I can hope that remains the case. But as all things with Buffalo Trace, when you ask deep probing questions, you get unimaginative responses.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I
Patrick,
do hope it means we get more of our favorites in the market sooner than later.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to make a comment, Patrick. This was great. Thank you. And I've been meaning to try the Four Roses single barrel, and this was a great opportunity to do so. And it is fantastic. So thank you. I love it.
Glad you liked it. Somebody said they do love Fireball, and you know what? I'm not a big flavored whiskey drinker, but Fireball, doesn't freak me out in any sense. We do like to say that, what a bottle of Fireball is really a bottle of bad decisions. So drink responsibly. All right. I think that's all the questions. So thank you very much. I really appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you. And I just want to say thank you to Tanner again for our demo as well. Appreciate both of you taking the time, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their night.
All right. Thank you.
Hey, thanks,
Take care.
Nuance, for making it happen. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.